Last year, after President Trump decided to yank the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal, Iran's foreign minister, a guy named Mohammad Javad Zarif, gave an interview to The New Yorker. "We can't start over," he told the magazine. "You need to be able to have a relationship that's based on some foundations." Zarif helped negotiate the Iran deal under Obama. He was basically the John Kerry of Iran. But he said that today, under Trump, diplomacy with the U.S. feels a little like the movie 50 First Dates. You might remember it. Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore go out on a date and become a couple, but he learns that she has a severe case of short-term memory loss, where every night, the slate gets wiped clean.
Hold on here. This sounds like something I would tell a psycho girl so she would stop calling me. Am I the psycho girl?
So every day, he has to make her fall in love with him all over again. Every day, he starts from zero.
Do you have any idea who I am?
I've never even met you.
Zarif seemed to be saying that the U.S. was giving him relationship whiplash. Obama wanted the deal. He wanted commitment. But Trump, he wanted to see other people. And Zarif was just looking for a reliable partner.
Today he says he wants to talk to President Rouhani. Tomorrow he says President Rouhani is a corrupt dictator. The third day he says he's a lovely man. Then he says he has to talk.
Iran's leaders sow chaos, death, and destruction.
I'm Lacey Healy, and today on Things That Go Boom, we're taking a look back at the relationship that brought us here. Because to understand why Trump would want to kill the deal, or even why Obama would have wanted it in the first place, first, you have to understand why, as Taylor Swift would say, we've got bad blood.
Experiencing the news each day can feel like a journey. With Up First from NPR, it doesn't have to be. Welcome to 15 easy minutes of breaking news, clarity on international and national affairs, all handed over not from some floating voice in the sky, from us, Layla, A, Steve, and me, Rachel. Start your day informed. Subscribe to Up First wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello.
Hello.
Welcome for having us. Thank you.
Bahram, who asked to just use his first name, was born in Iran. And like many Iranian Americans of a certain age, he had a front row seat to watch the relationship crumble. Today he lives in the U.S., in a home filled with art and pieces of poetry written in Farsi that he's clipped from the news. They're held to his fridge with little magnets.
My samovar runs by charcoal. That the water comes to the teapot and you put the teapot back.
He already has food on the table.
Yogurt soda. National cuisine from Iran. They call it cholo kebab. I hope you like it.
Many Iranians and Iranian Americans still haven't forgiven the U.S. for the coup it helped orchestrate in 1953. It's a key moment in our history that still stings today. From Bahram's perspective, though, well, he was just a kid.
And when I was 4 or 5, my father took us to Tehran, to capital of Iran. And I remember that he brought us by horse to the train station. And I couldn't sleep because I loved the train. And just picking my head out of the window and watching the environment, it was so much pleasure.
Nahid Siamdoust is a historian at Yale.
So 1950s Iran was a hopeful place.
She has dark curly hair and a confident smile. Before she went back to school for her PhD, she was a journalist based in the Middle East. And today, she spends a lot of her time thinking about the intersection of Iran's culture and politics.
There was great hope within society and on the streets for the notion of a more democratic government. And Iranians were very hopeful for finally owning their own natural resources, Iran's oil, and having a say in their own government.
Iran's oil is a very long story. But it starts with this British socialite named William Knox D'Arcy, who strikes a deal with Iran's monarch, the Shah, in the early 1900s. The deal grants D'Arcy the rights to go looking for oil, and since the Shah is skeptical he'll actually find any, he gives D'Arcy a pretty good deal. D'Arcy pays about £20,000, but if he strikes oil, Iran will only get 16% of the profits. That's okay because, at first, it looks like the Shah is right. After several harrowing years of smallpox, bandits, water shortages, and scorching heat, Darcy's ready to give up the ghost. He sends his prospectors a telegram telling them to come home at the end of the month. And as they're packing up, they strike oil. The British go all in on Darcy's find.
At the time, Iran's oil practically belonged to England, to a company sort of erroneously called the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, when in fact all the assets belonged to the United Kingdom, as well as nearly all the profits.
50 years after Darcy strikes it rich, British cars and trucks are running on cheap Iranian oil, factories are fueled by it, and the Royal Navy powers its ships with Iranian fuel. The Iranians themselves are less than thrilled with the short end of the stick. But they're not getting very far in negotiations. And then in comes this wildly popular Iranian parliamentarian named Mohammad Mossadegh. He leads the charge on a bill to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. And in March of 1951, it's approved. The move is so popular that 1 month later, Mossadegh is appointed prime minister by Iran's Shah. But Iranian oil helped pull the UK out of the economic doldrums after 2 world wars. So they're not just going to let it go. First, they try to cripple Iran with an all-out oil embargo. But Mossadegh won't budge.
And so they started really lobbying for the overthrow of Mossadegh.
The British turn to Washington, and they ask for a favor. But at first the US is like, no, thank you. Please keep us out of your mess. Eisenhower's afraid of throwing the whole region into chaos, and he tries to keep his distance. So the British up the ante. They talk up Iran's instability and the looming communist threat. Don't forget, it's the 50s.
And kind of use that as a scare tactic to bring the US government on board.
And just to drive the point home, they mention Mossadegh's personal behavior, which includes wearing pajamas to public appearances and giving speeches from his bed. He looks like a crazy person. And nobody wants that. So in August of 1953, with support from the British Embassy and Secret Service, the CIA organizes a coup called Operation Ajax. At the time, Bahram was just a child, living with his whole family in one small room.
Small room, but we had so many people, neighbors. At night, all the neighbors get together and talk. My father had a boss, that his boss had radio, and he brought us all this news.
Further pictures from Tehran show rioters in action as anti-royalist partisans, supporters of the aged Dr. Mossadegh, set about their work of destruction.
First thing we heard that there are lots of mobs around in the city, and they were shouting death to the Shah.
Royalists, in the most literal sense of the word, were in for a rough time.
Few days later, they said Shah left Iran.
The Shah and his queen arrive in Rome.
The news is disorienting. First, the Shah is run out of Iran after attempting to dismiss the popular Mossadegh.
Then people started again the riots and mobs.
For, by a dramatic turn in events, the royalists staged a coup d'etat.
They started to go by truck all over the cities and tearing down the signs, anything related to the prime minister or his party.
300 killed and hundreds wounded is a conservative estimate.
Then all of a sudden everything quiet down, and then they said Shah has returned.
Once again, the thoughts of the populace turned towards their sovereign.
Mossadegh is removed from power, and the Shah is restored to the throne.
Forced to abandon what we had created in the wilderness, is it too much to hope that we shall see once more the tankers of Britain at Abadan? Maybe sanity will yet prevail, and Iran and Britain go forward in harmony.
Lots of talking about there are British embassy is behind it. But later on, of course, I read the whole episode, what happened.
The young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, rules over the monarchy for the next 26 years. And the rest of the world moves on.
This song was played over and over and over again in the 50s on Iranian radio. And it's this desperate song of goodbye written by a student activist and immortalized in the voice of Hassan Golnaraghi. It's this young man saying, kiss me one last time. It's time to go and our spring is over. So this period of, hopefulness for new beginnings, that spring is over, and just kiss me one last time. I'm leaving. It's over.
But Bahram's a little young to understand the heartbreak. He's busy growing up. And soon, Tehran starts to change too.
There are more and more streets getting paved and more electrical posts with light is being installed on the streets. And people started to have more colorful clothing. And more movie theaters started to, come up like mushrooms. And lots of songs were happy songs. Barun barune means the rain is coming. And, usually after rain, things are getting better. After winter, there will be a spring. And seeing also, people were whispering with themselves, all these songs. It was a great time. It was a great time.
Women were more and more dressing in Western ways of miniskirts, the 70s fashion of miniskirts and bell-bottom pants and afros, and all of that was happening in Iran. And there were cabarets and theaters all around where the genders mixed.
At the same time as Iran begins to make all of these cultural strides, it also launches its own nuclear program, with a little help from the Eisenhower administration in an initiative kind of quaintly called Atoms for Peace. Basically, the U.S. provides research reactors, fuel, and training, and Iran, in exchange, promises not to build a bomb. But the coup still hangs heavy on the hearts and minds of many Iranians. A huge part of the country hasn't seen their lives improve.
There was still a vast population that was rural and that hadn't sort of caught on to this train, and that was still very traditional in its modes of being, that was still very religious and really begrudged this westernization.
And their discontent festers under the Shah's increasingly brutal rule.
There is a very heavy shadow of security and secret service. At least this is what we felt.
This underbelly of discontent became the grounds upon which those who were politically active mobilized ultimately for the mass street demonstrations that we see in the late 70s. It's sort of a collaboration between religious people spoken to by imams in the mosques, as well as leftists, as well as others who had gone abroad with the scholarships that the Shah had provided them and learned about democracy and what it means to live in a free society of the 60s and 70s of the U.S.
Actually, as late as 1978, U.S. officials are still huge fans of Iran.
Iran, because of the great leadership of the Shah.
President Jimmy Carter describes the country as an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. It's an oil-rich country, a key Gulf ally, fat with U.S.-supplied arms. It has a highly sophisticated army, a ruthless secret police, and a peaceful nuclear program. It doesn't look so different from some of our allies today. And the feeling is mutual. Iranian students are lining up to apply for the Shah's scholarships to study in the U.S.
My teacher says, "What happened, Bahram? What happened? Did you pass?" I said, "I don't know, but he gave me this flag, this little flag, And he was jumping up and down, hugging me. You are past, you are past. You know, you go to the American university. Where are you from? Iran, Persian.
So Bahram arrives in Washington.
And what's your name? No, welcome.
And things are really, really good. It's the 70s. The Shah, like the same guy, is still in power in Iran. And being Persian in America has its benefits. Bahram notices that some of the other students from the Middle East even lie and say they're from Iran.
I asked them, one of them, why? He says, we get a better treatment, especially from the girl.
Oh, that's so funny. Even the girls.
Right.
The girls liked the Iranian men. And it's not just the girls. Bahram's tuition, room and board, books, and medical benefits are all paid by the Shah. He even has a monthly salary. But back in Iran, a quiet rebellion is brewing. The Ayatollah Khomeini, an imposing Shiite cleric in a black robe with a white beard, had been exiled after speaking out against the Shah. But cassette tapes of his sermons go viral.
He represented all those people, all those millions of people who just felt left out. This was someone who spoke to them, who spoke about the injustices and living in a just world and promising all kinds of things like free electricity and free water. None of these things, of course, materialized because that is just not how real politics works. But he was seen as the dawn of a new beginning.
He's seen by some supporters as a savior of not just Iran, but the whole region. By the late 1970s, riots, strikes, and mass demonstrations against the Shah are gripping Iran.
Realized these people were determined to go into the street, even if it meant facing bullets. Many of these people expected to die. They had written their wills the night before when tanks and soldiers were still in the street.
And in January 1979, the Shah's government collapses. He and his family flee, and Khomeini returns.
And so what is the scene when he arrives back in Iran?
I mean, the mood for Ayatollah Khomeini's return was euphoric. Hundreds of thousands sort of gathered around Mehrabad airport where he lands.
It was the most incredible scene. Nobody could possibly know how many millions lined the route of his 20-mile drive.
Tehran hadn't seen anything like it before.
And fought to clamber on the Dodge station wagon that carried him. Dozens were trampled underfoot in the bedlam.
And I mean, the masses of people who are there to receive him, the hands that are just reaching toward him just for the chance to be touched by this saint almost.
This is the man they call the father of the revolution. And this is the moment that millions have been waiting for. His first words were, as expected, forceful and to the point. We must cut off the hands of the foreigners who are responsible for our ills.
Like a lot of students, Bahram is sympathetic to the revolution. So he goes back to Iran to support it. When he arrives, it's just before a local election. So he takes his mother to the nearby mosque to vote. And he tells her to let the people know that she doesn't know how to read or write. When his mother tells the woman at the polling station, though, the woman takes out a list. And she tells Bahram's mother to vote for the names on the list. They're all supporters of Khomeini. When Bahram confronts the woman, she accuses him of being a communist.
So they grabbed me and they raised hell that I'm a communist, I'm making a problem, I'm a troublemaker, and they put me in a room.
Eventually he's let go, but things just seem to get worse for the country from there.
All the signs of the Shah's westernization are ransacked and burnt down. Cinemas, liquor stores.
A teenage girl being dragged by hair on a street pavement to the Revolutionary Guard car. She was selling the newspaper who was criticizing the government.
the Shah's generals and others closely associated with him are arrested and killed in quite sort of public executions.
I saw my mother throw out all of our books.
Suddenly, she's worried about having books in the house that challenge Islam.
Your blood was boiling. What happened to this nation? What happened to these people?
One night, Bahram goes to his parents.
Everybody was up and we were sitting around the tablecloth, and I told my parents that I don't think we can survive here. You guys need to be quiet, not to do anything. I'm going to go back to US. Then from there, I try to get you out of Iran.
So he goes back to America, which at this point feels more like home than home. Absent his former subsidies, he's just scraping by. But as always, America's a friendly place. He finds that folks are willing to help, and he even finds a professor who rents him a room for cheap in return for help with odd jobs. Then
the American embassy in Tehran is in the hands of Muslim students tonight.
November comes.
Yeah, the hostage crisis, November 4th, 1979.
The hostages, men and women, were blindfolded and herded into the embassy's basement.
That, of course, changed everything as far as U.S.-Iran relations were concerned.
The students want the deposed Shah returned to Iran for trial.
You know, the U.S. embassy was called the Den of Spies.
While the Iranians burned an American flag in front of the embassy, they said the takeover had the express blessing of the Ayatollah Khomeini.
A number of students climb the embassy walls, and they have arms, and they're able to get in there and then take the embassy staff hostage, blindfolding them and binding their hands, and very soon thereafter parading them in front of cameras for the whole nation to see.
In one word, oil. Washington is tremendously concerned about Iran's oil supplies and our need for them, and of course concerned about the safety of those Americans still at the embassy.
Thank you very much, Ted.
Ted Koppel's voice rings in Americans' ears as coverage of the crisis continues and grows.
That U.S. attempt to launch a military rescue of the American hostages in Tehran has been, as you have now heard several times, aborted. 8 U.S. servicemen killed in the process.
It's the birth of Nightline, and ABC News decides that the best way to compete against The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson is to update Americans on the latest news from Iran, relentlessly, for over a year. Every night it's a new day. America held hostage. Day 5. Day 10.
The 108th day of captivity, the 222nd day of captivity, the 377th day of captivity for American hostages in Iran.
It's the best reality show around. It makes Koppel a star, and it changes the way we all think of Iran.
So this became a national nightly consumption, which I think played a great role in further long-term harming relations between America and Iran, because this was seared deep in the psyche.
52 American diplomats and citizens were held hostage for 444 days. And for Bahram, back at American University, suddenly the U.S. doesn't feel like such a nice place.
All of a sudden, things 180 degrees changed. We are no longer dear Iranian student.
The university professor Bahram is living with turns cold. He doesn't seem comfortable when Bahram interacts with the kids.
And I went to him, I said, "Sir, if you want me to leave, I will leave." He said, "I really appreciate it if you leave."
The hostage crisis burrowed so deep into the American psyche that a lot of people still pin the outcome of the next election on this one event alone.
No one should underestimate the resolve of the American government and the American people in this matter.
Carter's inability to bring the hostages home made him look weak. And even though it's more likely the faltering economy that helped Reagan put the final nail in the coffin of the 1980 election, rumors still circulated that Reagan's campaign staff negotiated with the Iranians to make sure that the hostages wouldn't be released before Americans went to the polls. After all, Such a crucial event might have given Carter just the boost he needed to hang on.
So early and complete was Mr. Carter's defeat last night that he came to his headquarters hotel in Washington an hour before the polls closed on the West Coast to make his concession speech.
It just adds fuel to the fire when, only a few hours after Reagan delivers his inaugural address,
Now, day one. Day one of Ronald Reagan's presidency, and day one of freedom for 52 Americans.
the remaining hostages are released.
These two historic events moved almost on parallel tracks today.
Subsequent presidents try half-heartedly to salvage the relationship, but it seems doomed. Iran-Contra creates a political firestorm for Reagan only a few years after the hostage crisis. And a few years after that, America accidentally shoots down an Iranian passenger plane, killing all 290 passengers on board on their way to Mecca. If this is a relationship, the U.S. and Iran aren't just broken up. They're fighting over the kids, inflicting all sorts of damage along the way. And meanwhile, Iran's nuclear program marches on and starts to look a lot more suspicious, especially in the wake of 9/11.
States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil.
I mean, as the term says, evil.
By seeking weapons of mass destruction, these regimes pose a grave and growing danger. They could provide these arms to terrorists, giving them the means to match their hatred.
About a year later, the U.S. invaded Iraq. It had already invaded Afghanistan following 9/11. And Iran very plausibly thought that it was next on the list of countries that was going to be invaded.
All nations should know America will do what is necessary to ensure our nation's security.
Little did we know at the time, a guy named A.Q. Khan, otherwise known as the father of Pakistan's nuclear weapons program, had sold Iran the technology to build a bomb. In 2002, the Bush administration accuses Iran of developing weapons of mass destruction.
Iran remains a serious concern because of its across-the-board pursuit of weapons of mass destruction and missile capabilities.
Iran denies the accusations, but in 2003, in the wake of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, there's pretty hard evidence that they stop. Iran's new leader, who came into power after Khomeini's death in '89 and whose name sounds super similar, Ayatollah Khamenei, orders the suspension of the work they've been doing since the middle of the Iran-Iraq War. But the stuff that looks peaceful, like it's just for nuclear power, he keeps that alive. And the program keeps on looking suspicious until, well, today. But when President Obama is elected, he decides right up front that he's going to try something new.
And so when Obama took over as president, and in March 2009, on the occasion of the Iranian New Year, the first day of spring, Nowruz.
Today I want to extend my very best wishes to all who are celebrating Nowruz around the world.
Made the speech reaching out to the leadership and people at large and called for a new beginning.
For nearly 3 decades, relations between our nations have been strained. But at this holiday, we are reminded of the common humanity that binds us together.
People all of a sudden were quite hopeful.
The United States wants the Islamic Republic of Iran to take its rightful place in the community of nations.
Obama's name was turned in Persian diction into Ubama, he's with us, Obama, he's with us. And he was heralded as somebody who was willing to bring respect to the table.
Thank you. And Eid-e-Shoma Mubarak.
He says, Happy New Year.
And then, of course, that culminated in the Iran nuclear deal.
Like the rest of this story, though, the history isn't quite so straightforward. Because almost immediately after Obama's Nowruz address, demonstrators take to the streets in Iran to protest its latest election, distracting the country's leaders from dealing with just about anything else. And not long after that, the U.S. and its allies discover what looks like a secret nuclear weapons facility in the side of a mountain.
The Islamic Republic of Iran has been building a covert uranium enrichment facility near Qom for several years. This is not the first time that Iran has concealed information about its nuclear program.
So, the path to the deal isn't paved with golden bricks. Actually, we're at a path that's probably the kind you'd want to go around. Old, cracked, roots growing up through the dirt. And that's the thing about relationships. They don't always work out. And even when they do, they can end up on a thorny path.
Of course, it started very well. We wanted to have that revolution, but it was hijacked. And it was a kind of the victory of ignorance over knowledge. I feel so guilty that we misjudged, we misinformed. You know, they used us.
Bahram's family's relationship with Iran is thorny too. He did manage to move 11 of his family members out of Iran. And despite the ongoing turmoil between the two countries, they have a good life. But Bahram told us this one last story before we left. One day, after his parents have come to live with him in the U.S., Bahram sees his father sitting alone, with tears in his eyes.
And I sat next to him, I said, Dad, what's wrong? Why you are so down? He said, I wanted to get a permission. This is hard. I said, you want permission? From me? He said, yes. He said, I want to go home. I said, why? He said, I love this country. Everybody is so nice. We smile at each other on the street, but we cannot communicate. So I said, Dad, you love of my life. If really you want to go back home, I take care of it. So we arranged for my father to go back.
After all it had done to hurt him, Iran was still home. Like any failed relationship, it's not just one thing that led us all here. Years of misinformation, politics, greed, reality TV, and some real security interests on both sides brought us to this point. We can't go back and change the past. What we can do is learn from our mistakes and move on. The Iran deal was, in so many ways, an attempt to do just that. So, are we learning? Next week, we'll take a look at one of the mistakes we might still be making today.
I think the system is actually rigged. It's rigged against the people who are fighting for genuine American interests.
This was no longer a coercive strategy to bring Iran to the negotiating table. Instead, it was clear that they wanted something else.
Things That Go Boom is a production of PRX and Inkstick Media. For more information and behind-the-scenes action, follow us on social at Inkstick Media or visit inkstickmedia.com. Our show is produced by Ruth Morris. Catherine Vink is our assistant producer, and Mary Beth Kirshner is our story whisperer. Darian Schulman composes our music, and our engineer is Robin Wise. A huge thank you to John Barth, Melinda Ward, and historian Narges Bajali for their review. Also, a big thank you to Bahram, who is a friend of our producer Ruth, for sharing his story. And to Nahid Siamdust for help with music suggestions and historical recordings. And finally, thanks to the Carnegie Corporation of New York, Plowshares Fund, and N Square for making our show possible.
I have fruit too. Let me bring that one.
Whoa.
Just leave it here.
What's this?
You have to try. These are similar to the Persian grapes. That's why we like it a lot.
Oh my goodness. This is
and
too much. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.